She ran $1 billion empire from a wheelchair and hadn't let anyone close enough to matter in 4 years. He fixed broken things for a living and raised his daughter alone in a one-bedroom apartment 12 floors below her office. They had no business being in the same conversation, let alone the same world. But the night the elevator died and locked her between floors in the dark, the night her careful, controlled life cracked open, the only voice that reached her through the panic was his. Like, comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The elevator doors opened exactly at 6:47 every morning, and Autumn Sinclair was already inside her office before they closed again. That was not an accident. She had learned early on that timing was a form of power. If you arrived before everyone else, you set the tempo. You made other people adjust to you. You never walked into a room that was already in motion. You were the motion. The building's security staff knew her schedule well enough that they didn't need to greet her anymore. They just straightened up when the black town car pulled to the curb, and by the time the driver had come around to the passenger side, the lobby's automatic doors were already open and waiting. The wheelchair came out first, then Autumn. She transferred with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times and had no patience for anyone who made it a moment worth noticing. The chair was custom-built, matte black frame, lightweight titanium, adjusted to her exact measurements. It cost more than most people's cars. She propelled herself through the lobby without slowing down, nodded to Darnell at the front desk, the only person in the building who got a nod, and rolled into the private elevator on the left that she alone used. The doors closed. 30 seconds of silence. 42nd floor. This was her day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. Autumn Sinclair was 27 years old, and she ran Sinclair Technologies like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Revenue projections for Q3 had come in at 11% above forecast. The Singapore partnership was 2 signatures away from closing. She had 3 board meetings this week, a product launch in 6 days, and approximately 0 interest in anything that didn't directly feed those outcomes. She had not been on a date in 2 years. She had not been to a family dinner in longer than that. She had one friend, Priya, her general counsel, and their conversations were mostly about litigation. None of that bothered her. She had decided a long time ago that it wouldn't. The accident had happened 4 years ago, on a Tuesday in February, which she always thought was an absurd detail, as if catastrophic things should only happen on dramatic days, Fridays or full moons or significant anniversaries. But life doesn't choreograph itself. She had been 23, just named interim CEO after her father's health collapsed, and she was driving back from a meeting in Jersey at 11 at night because she worked like that back then too. The roads were wet. A truck drifted lanes. She remembered the lights, then nothing, then waking up in a hospital room with her mother crying at the foot of the bed and a doctor explaining, in the overly gentle tones people used when they thought gentleness could soften what they were about to say, that the spinal cord injury was complete at T10. She would not walk again. Her mother had reached for her hand. Autumn had stared at the ceiling and started calculating what this meant for the company restructuring she had scheduled for the following month. That was probably not healthy. She was aware of that. But the alternative, sitting inside what had happened to her, feeling the full weight of it, had felt like a door she could open once and never close again. So she had not opened it. She had instead built the hardest version of herself she could manage. She had hired the best physical therapist in the city, developed upper body strength that surprised even her own medical team, and returned to the office 41 days after the accident. She had fired 2 board members who suggested she consider stepping back. She had taken the company public 9 months later. The message she sent to the world was simple. Nothing has changed. And mostly, it worked. The problem, the part she didn't discuss with anyone, was that nothing had changed because she had not allowed anything to change. Every variable in her life was controlled. The building's accessibility was maintained to exacting standards because she paid for those standards herself. Her schedule was managed by her assistant Marcus, who had a gift for anticipating what she needed before she asked. Her apartment, 2 blocks from the office, had been completely renovated before she moved in. Her social circle had been, over 4 years, reduced to the functional minimum. She knew what she was doing. She just didn't intend to stop. Marcus was waiting outside the elevator when the doors opened on 42, tablet in hand, already talking. Good morning. Singapore called at 6. Raymond Chen wants to push the Thursday call to Friday, which means it overlaps with the product demo unless we shift the demo to 2. But 2 is when you have move the demo to 4, Chiang, Autumn said, rolling past him without breaking speed. Email Chen that Friday at 9 is the only option. If he pushes back, tell him we're entertaining a conversation with Hyundai. Are we? No, but he doesn't know that. She pushed through the glass door to her office and went straight to her desk, pulling her laptop toward her before she'd even settled fully. What else? Marcus followed, cycling through his tablet. Board pre-read is due by noon. Elliot Marsh's assistant called again about the charity gala. Apparently the seating arrangement you approved last week raised concerns with 2 other board members. Tell them the seating arrangement stands. They're specifically asking whether Marcus. She looked up. The seating arrangement stands. He made a note. He was 26 and extremely good at his job and had learned in 18 months exactly where the edge of Autumn's patience was. Your 11 o'clock moved, and there's a maintenance notice. 3rd floor HVAC is being worked on today, which apparently means the service elevator situation. I don't need the service elevator. Right. They flagged it in case there were any disruptions to the main elevators while they're routing power. Fine. She was already reading the Singapore file. Close the door on your way out. He did. The floor was quiet. Early morning was the only time Autumn genuinely liked the office, before everyone else arrived, before the noise and the motion and the endless performance of managing people who needed reassurance about things she found obvious. In the early morning, it was just the city below and the work in front of her and the particular silence of being the only person on a floor that held 42 desks. She worked for 2 hours without stopping, and then her coffee went cold and she pushed back from the desk to go to the small kitchen at the far end of the floor. And that was when she heard it. From somewhere in the corridor, a sound she didn't hear often in this building, because this building was maintained obsessively. A child crying. But Autumn stopped in the hallway and listened. The crying was coming from near the maintenance closet at the end of the corridor. Not the dramatic, sustained wail of a seriously distressed child, more the hiccuping, worn-out sound of a kid who had been crying for a while and was running out of energy for it. She went to the end of the hall. Sitting on the floor against the wall beside the maintenance closet, back pressed to the baseboard, was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Brown pigtails, one coming partially undone. Jeans and a yellow long-sleeve shirt. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and her face turned down, and when Autumn stopped about 6 feet away, the girl looked up. Red eyes, tear-tracked cheeks, and the immediate wide-eyed stillness of a child who had just been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. "Hi," Autumn said. The girl said nothing. "Are you hurt?" A small head shake. "Are you lost?" A pause. Then a tiny shrug, which Autumn translated as, "Probably, yes." She looked down the hallway in both directions. The floor was empty. It was barely past 8. "How did you get up here?" "The elevator," the girl said. Her voice was small and a little hoarse from crying. "By yourself?" "My dad brought me. But he had to go do something, and I was supposed to wait, and then I accidentally went to the wrong floor, and now I don't know where the right floor is." She sniffed hard. "I pressed a lot of buttons." Autumn looked at her. The kid was trying very hard not to start crying again, which Autumn found, against her will, somewhat impressive. "What floor is your dad on?" 3, the girl said. Then, with sudden uncertainty, "Or maybe 30? They look the same." "They really don't." "They do on the buttons." Autumn looked at her for a moment. She almost called Marcus. That would have been the sensible thing. Have Marcus come deal with this, locate the father, route the child back to wherever she belonged. That was what assistants were for. Instead, she said, "Come on, I'll take you to the lobby and we'll figure it out from there." The girl stood up, rubbing her face with the back of her hand in the way kids did, thorough and completely unselfconscious. She looked at the wheelchair with the frank, unguarded curiosity that small children had and adults had learned to perform the absence of. "What happened to your legs?" "I was in an accident," Autumn said. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." The girl seemed to accept this with the quick practicality of children who haven't yet learned to make things complicated. "Okay." she said, and walked beside the wheelchair toward the elevator like this was perfectly normal. In the elevator, she stood with her hands folded in front of her, watching the numbers descend. "I'm Lily," she said. "Autumn. That's a season. I'm aware." "I like fall," Lily said with great seriousness, "because of the leaves." "Good to know," Autumn said. Nathan Reed was on his hands and knees in the third-floor mechanical room when his radio crackled. "Reed." That was Darnell at the front desk, which was unusual. Darnell never used the radio unless it was serious. "You want to come to the lobby?" "I'm in the middle of It's not a question, man. Come to the lobby." He sat back on his heels, rubbed a streak of grease off his palm with a rag, and stood up. He was a big man, 6'1", broad across the shoulders, with the kind of hands that showed his work. 32 years old and already had some gray at his temples, which his daughter found hilarious and he tried not to think about. He unclipped the radio from his belt and walked out to the elevator. When the lobby doors opened, he saw Lily first, standing near the front desk, completely fine, a little worse for wear around the eyes, and the relief that moved through his chest was so strong it almost buckled him. "Lily." He crossed the lobby in 4 strides and crouched down to her level. "Baby, I've been looking all over for—" "Dad, this is Autumn," Lily pointed behind her. "She found me. She has a really fast wheelchair." Nathan looked up. He had seen Autumn Sinclair exactly twice before, once in the lobby when her car pulled in and he happened to be near the door, and once on a security monitor in the maintenance office when there'd been a false alarm on 42 and they'd needed visual confirmation it wasn't a break-in. Both times she had been in motion. All contained efficiency and the particular authority of someone who had stopped second-guessing herself. This was closer than either of those times. She was looking at him with a calm, direct expression that gave nothing away. "Your daughter pressed approximately every button in the elevator," she said. "Yeah, she does that." He stood up, one hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'm sorry. She was supposed to stay in the maintenance office with Carlos. She's not supposed to be up there at all. She's fine," Autumn said. Not warmly, exactly, but not with the particular coolness he would have expected from someone whose morning had been interrupted by a lost 6-year-old on a floor where no one under 30 was supposed to be. "She found a good spot to sit down and wait." "I did cry a little," Lily admitted. "A little," Autumn confirmed. Nathan looked between them. There was something slightly strange about the way Lily was looking at Autumn, attentive, like she was watching something interesting. Lily didn't take to strangers quickly, usually. She was polite because he had raised her to be polite, but she kept her real attention private until she decided someone deserved it. She seemed to have made up her mind about Autumn in under 20 minutes, which was fast. "Thank you," he said. "I mean it. I'm sorry she bothered you." "She didn't," Autumn said with a slight flatness that suggested she was neither fishing for conversation nor dismissing him, just stating what was accurate. Then she turned her chair and went back toward the private elevator. Nathan watched her go. Then he looked down at Lily, who was watching the elevator doors close. "She's nice," Lily said. "She barely said 10 words to you." "She didn't have to." Lily tilted her head. "She came herself. She didn't just send somebody." Nathan didn't have an answer to that. He put his hand on his daughter's head and steered her back toward the maintenance office, thinking that was the end of it. He would think about that moment later, the particular sureness of that's the end of it, and find it funny in the way that only certain things could be funny once enough time had passed. The building was called Orion Tower, 44 floors of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan, and Nathan had worked here for 3 years. He'd gotten the job the year after Claire died, when he had needed something stable and full benefited and close to Lily's school. The head of maintenance job had been a step up from the commercial building he'd been at before, and the pay was better, and they'd let him bring Lily in on school holidays when his regular sitter was unavailable, which had been the detail that tipped the scales. He was good at the job. That wasn't arrogance. He just understood buildings the way some people understood code or numbers. The systems, the logic of how everything connected, the way a small, neglected problem became a large, expensive one if you didn't catch it early. He kept meticulous logs. His team of 8 respected him, which had taken about a year to establish, and which he did not take for granted. He did not think much about the people who occupied the building. That wasn't his attitude. He wasn't dismissive about it. It was just that the occupants in the building were different problems, and he dealt with the building. 42nd floor was Sinclair Technologies, and that meant making sure the HVAC ran clean, the plumbing stayed sound, the fiber connections were never interrupted, and the private elevator was maintained to the highest tolerance, because the CEO used it exclusively and its maintenance contract specified quarterly inspections, plus immediate response to any reported irregularity. He knew her name. He knew her general schedule from the building's access logs. He knew the accessibility requirements for the floor because those were his responsibility. He had not, before today, thought about her as a person in any particular way. The day the power failed was 3 weeks after the elevator incident with Lily. It was a Thursday. October, which meant the city was doing the thing it did in fall where the light came in at an angle that made everything look more significant than it was, amber and long and full of dust. Nathan was in the mechanical room on sub-basement 2 when the building's backup monitoring system flagged a primary circuit irregularity on the east side of floors 38 through 44. Not a full failure, just an intermittent draw pattern that suggested something on the primary line was pulling inconsistently. He had radioed his team and sent 2 guys to check the panel on 38 while he pulled up the system map. That was when the lights in the mechanical room flickered, and then came back. And then, at the same time, his radio crackled with Carlos saying, "Reed, we've got something weird up here." The emergency line lit up on the wall panel. The wall panel fed directly from the intercom inside the private elevator. He picked up before the second pulse. "This is maintenance. Go ahead." Silence for a moment. Then a voice, controlled, tight, trying very hard to stay that way. "The elevator has stopped." He recognized her voice even through the intercom's compression. He had heard it once, briefly, in the lobby. It had the same quality now, precise, stripped down to the necessary. But underneath that, there was something she was working to keep out of it. "Miss Sinclair, I'm Nathan Reed, head of maintenance. Can you tell me what floor indicator was showing when it stopped?" "Between 40 and 41. The lights are on. The door is not opening." "Okay, you're not in the dark. That's good." He was already moving, pulling the building schematics on his tablet with one hand. "Is the emergency lighting panel on?" "Usually there's a small orange indicator strip near the—" "I see it. It's on." "Good. That means the emergency system kicked in, which means there's power to the cab. The doors didn't open, which means we're dealing with a leveling issue. The elevator hasn't aligned with the floor, so the safety lock's engaged. That's what they're supposed to do." He kept his voice even, matter of fact, not because he was being clinical, but because he understood that the most useful thing he could offer her right now was steadiness. "You are not in danger. The cab is locked in place. It is not going to move or drop. I need you to understand that before I explain what happens next." A beat of silence. "I understand. Do you need me to stay on the line while I route to my team?" "Yes," she said, and the shortness of it, the fact that she didn't qualify it or dress it up, told him more than a longer answer would have. "I'm staying on," he said. "I'm pulling up the panel routing right now. You're going to hear me talking to my team on the radio, and that might sound alarming because we use numbers and we talk fast. But those are normal operational codes, not emergency codes. If I hear an emergency code, I'll tell you immediately. You'll hear everything I hear." "Okay. Is there anything in the elevator cab that you need? Water, medication, anything like that?" "No." "Temperature okay?" "It's fine." "Okay." He switched to radio, keeping the intercom open. "Carlos, what's the read on 38 panel?" Carlos's voice came back fast. "Main breaker on the east circuit is showing an overload. Looks like the draw spiked from that new server install on 39. I've got Victor isolating it now. I need manual release on the private elevator cab between 40 and 41. Who's closer, you or Jimenez?" "Jimenez is on 40. I'll send him. Tell him no power tools until I give clearance. Manual protocol." He went back to the intercom. "Miss Sinclair, my guy Jimenez is going to 40 right now. The manual release panel is inside the elevator machine room, which is accessed from 40, not from where you are. You won't see him or hear him until the doors open. That'll take about 4 minutes from right now." "4 minutes," she said, give or take. He paused. "How are you doing?" A silence that was maybe 2 seconds long but felt deliberate. "I'm fine." He didn't push it. Okay. But he didn't put down the intercom either. He sat on the edge of the work table with the tablet in his lap and the schematics loading, and he kept the line open, and after about 30 seconds he said, "You've been in the building since 6:40 this morning." She was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that?" "Access logs. I check them for occupancy when I'm doing maintenance scheduling. I know the building's rhythms, who comes in early, who stays late." He paused. "You always beat the security shift change." "I like the building when it's quiet." "Yeah," he said. "Me too, actually. Best time to catch problems. Nobody's generating load yet, HV. AC is cycling at its normal rate. You can hear the building breathe in the morning." He hadn't meant to say something like that. It just came out, the way things did when he was focused on a task and his brain's usual filter was occupied elsewhere. But she said, after a short pause, "That's an unusual way to describe it." "Probably." "No, I mean," she stopped. "It's accurate. I've thought about it similarly. The building has a different quality before people arrive." "Agreed." He watched the schematic update on his tablet. "Jimenez is at the machine room door." "Okay." "He's going to bypass the safety interlock. You'll hear a sound like a heavy relay clicking, and then the doors should release. It might take a couple of tries." "How many is a couple?" "3 at most. It's a mechanical issue, not an electrical one at this point." He hesitated. "Are you claustrophobic?" A pause. "I wasn't before." The way she said before, the slight pause around it, the weight of it, the careful brevity. He understood without asking that before referenced something specific and significant, and that she had not intended to say it out loud, and that she was now waiting to see if he would ask. He didn't ask. 3 clicks, he said. "Ready?" "Ready." The first relay sound came, a heavy mechanical clunk that resonated through the shaft. Nothing. Second one, 20 seconds later. A tremor in the doors but no opening. He talked her through the wait between each attempt with small, practical information. The age of the elevator, the standard maintenance cycle, the fact that manual releases worked on the third attempt roughly 90% of the time, which he stated as a fact and not a reassurance. Third attempt. The doors opened. What? He was on 40, standing 6 feet back from the open elevator doors, when she rolled out. She stopped just past the threshold, took 2 measured breaths, the kind of breathing you did after you'd been holding yourself together, and then looked up. Their eyes met. Her expression was composed, almost entirely. He was looking for it because he'd been on the other end of that intercom voice, and he could see the remains of what that 4 minutes had cost her, a slight tightness around her jaw, a stillness that was a little too careful to be natural. She had already put most of it away, with the speed of someone who'd had a lot of practice. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He meant it plainly, without inflation. She looked at him for a moment that felt slightly longer than the functional one. He had the sense of being seen in the way that was different from being observed, like she was filing something, some small piece of unexpected information, into a category she hadn't expected to use. Then she turned her chair and went down the hall toward the stairs she would take to her floor. He watched her go, then looked at Jimenez, who was deliberately studying the ceiling. "Not a word," Nathan said. "I didn't say anything," Jimenez said. "I know what you were thinking." "I was thinking about the relay," Jimenez said, very innocently. Nathan looked at him. "She's intense," Jimenez offered. "She was trapped in an elevator for 4 minutes," Nathan said. "She was intense and polite, which is better than most people manage." He went back to the mechanical room and finished the day. The next morning, Marcus sent a formal email to the building management office on behalf of Sinclair Technologies, citing the maintenance team's response to the elevator incident, and specifically naming Nathan Reed as having handled the situation with exceptional competence and professionalism. A courtesy copy was routed to Nathan's inbox. He read it twice, then put his radio on the charger and went to start the morning rounds. 3 days later, something on 42 needed attention. This happened periodically, an air return that was running too warm, a sensor in the server room that had started giving intermittent false readings. Normal building stuff. Usually, Nathan sent Carlos or Jimenez on routine floor visits, unless the issue required his direct read. This one, technically, probably could have been handled by Carlos. He went himself. He told himself it was because the server room sensor needed the senior tech's assessment to determine whether it was a hardware issue or a calibration issue. That was true. It was also not the entire truth, and he was aware enough of himself to know that, even if he chose not to think about it directly, the sensor was, in fact, a calibration issue. 20 minutes. He was recalibrating the reading profile when the office door opened behind him and he heard the specific sound of the wheelchair on the polished floor. "Read," she said. He looked over his shoulder. She was in the doorway, tablet in her lap. Dressed the way she was every morning, all edges, perfectly pressed, everything in its place except for a small ink mark on the side of her right hand, just below the knuckle, that suggested she'd been working on paper and had smudged it. "Ms. Sinclair." "Autumn is fine." She said it like a small correction, not a warmth. "What's the issue?" "Environmental sensor. It was reading high. I recalibrated the baseline. Should stabilize in about an hour." He turned back to the panel. "I'll send a follow-up log." "How often does this happen?" "Sensors? Seasonally, usually. Temperature differential between outside and inside when the weather shifts. It throws off baseline readings that were calibrated in summer. Nothing to worry about." She came further into the room, stopping near the rack of equipment. He noticed she was looking not at him, but at the equipment itself, reading the panel displays, checking the indicators. She actually knew what she was looking at. That was not a given with even technically sophisticated clients. "You know server room infrastructure," he said. "I started the company in my apartment with 3 servers on a folding table," she said. "I've done my own cooling management." "That's how a lot of the best ones start." She glanced at him. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the absence of the deliberate neutrality she usually wore, which was its own thing. "Your daughter," she said. "Is she usually here on school breaks?" "When I can arrange coverage, yeah. I try to keep her to the lower floors, but she's..." He paused. "She has her own sense of direction. She told me she likes fall because of the leaves. She says that every year. She has a whole routine about it." He closed the panel cover and straightened up. "She also told me she thought you were nice." Something shifted in Autumn's expression. So fast he almost missed it. Not discomfort. More like an adjustment, a small recalibration, the way the sensor had just done. "I didn't do anything particularly nice," she said. "You came yourself," Nathan said. She noticed. Autumn looked at him. He had the sense again of being filed, of some unexpected data point landing in a place it hadn't been expected. She didn't answer. She turned her chair and left. Nathan looked at the server rack for a moment, then started gathering his tools. He was, he realized, going to find reasons to be on this floor again. That was a problem, probably. But it was also true. And Nathan Reed had learned after 3 years of raising a kid alone and working hard and living in the careful, narrow channel he'd built for himself after Claire, that he wasn't very good at lying to himself. He could be honest with himself about a thing and still choose not to act on it. That was fine. That was the plan. He picked up his kit and walked to the elevator. The building had very good bones, he thought. You could learn a lot from a building, if you paid attention. He pressed the button for sub-basement 2, and the doors closed, and the cable took the weight. The sensor log Nathan submitted after the server room visit was 3 paragraphs long, thorough, technical, and completely unnecessary in its level of detail for what had been a routine recalibration. He knew that when he was writing it. He wrote it anyway, because it gave him something concrete to do with the hour after he got home, after Lily was in bed, after the apartment was quiet in the way that apartments got quiet when there was only one adult in them. He sat at the kitchen table and wrote a maintenance log with the same focus he would have given a critical infrastructure report. And then he sent it to the building management system and closed his laptop and sat there for a while with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was not a man who was easily pulled toward things he shouldn't be. That had been true even before Claire, and it had become more true after, because losing someone reshaped you in ways that were sometimes invisible until you ran into them. One of the ways it had reshaped Nathan was that he had gotten very good at identifying the difference between what he wanted and what was wise. He could feel both things simultaneously and choose the latter without too much suffering about it. He had done this many times in the 3 years since Claire died. Small choices, quiet redirections, the daily labor of being a functioning adult with a child who depended on him. He identified what was happening in the server room that afternoon, and he chose to be sensible about it. He lasted 8 days. What broke him was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just after 3, when he was doing a routine walk of the 42nd floor's perimeter, checking fire suppression system inspection tags, which was mundane work that required minimal attention, and he rounded the corner near the glass-walled conference room and found Autumn sitting alone at the long table, facing the window, doing nothing. Not working, not on her phone, not reviewing anything, just sitting there with her hands in her lap and her eyes somewhere outside the glass, and the expression on her face was something he hadn't seen on her before. The face people had when they thought no one was watching, when the particular version of themselves they showed the world had slipped. She looked exhausted. Not physically. She always moved with precision and force, and she still sat with perfect posture even now, but in some deeper way, the kind that sleep didn't fix. Tired of something that wasn't physical. He should have kept walking. The inspection tags were on the wall 40 feet further down the corridor, and he could have kept moving, and she wouldn't have seen him. He knocked on the open conference room door. She turned immediately, and the expression he'd seen was gone in the second it took her to register who was there. Her face reorganized itself, composed, neutral, the careful blankness of a practiced executive. But she'd been looking out a window alone in a conference room at 3 in the afternoon, and they both knew it. "Reed," she said. "Sorry to interrupt, I'm doing suppression system tags. Mind if I—" He gestured at the panel on the conference room wall. "Takes 30 seconds. "Go ahead." He came in and checked the tag, logged it on his tablet. He was aware of her watching him with the same direct, filing attention she'd had in the server room. He didn't try to fill the silence, because silence only became uncomfortable if you made it one. When he finished, he turned to go, and then she said, "How's Lily?" He stopped. "She's good," he said. "She lost a tooth last week. She negotiated significantly harder than the situation required." Something in Autumn's expression shifted. Not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. For what? The going rate is apparently $5 in her classroom. She asked for 10, on the grounds that it was her first tooth and represented a significant developmental milestone. "Did you negotiate back?" "I offered $750 and she accepted after approximately 40 minutes of deliberation." He paused. She made a PowerPoint. This time something crossed Autumn's face that was, without question, almost a laugh. She caught it, but not entirely, and the not-quite laugh changed the whole architecture of her face for a second. Something younger in it, something unguarded. "A PowerPoint," she said. 3 slides. Title page, the argument, and a comparison chart of primary school tooth fairy rates in our zip code. She pulled the data from a parenting forum. "She's 6. 6.5, he said. "She corrects people about the half." Autumn looked at him for a moment. "Sit down," she said. It was not phrased as a question. It wasn't quite an order either. It was something between them, the kind of statement that was really just, "I want you to." He pulled out a chair across the table from her and sat, leaving his tablet on the table between them. Outside the windows, the city was doing its October thing. The Hudson was visible from here at this angle, a dark strip of water against the pale blue sky. "How long have you worked in buildings?" she asked. "About 12 years, started as an HVAC tech out of trade school." "You went to trade school instead of college." "I went to trade school because I knew what I wanted to do. College felt like 4 years of deciding." He shrugged. "I don't regret it. Most people your age feel the need to defend that choice." "I'm not most people my age." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "You're not." He didn't know what to do with that. He left it alone. "You know this building the way most people know their own apartments," she said. "I've noticed it, the way you move through it. It's my job. It's more than your job. You're paying attention to something beyond the function." She turned her chair slightly toward the window. "I do the same thing with the company. The way the teams function, the dynamics, not just the numbers. Marcus thinks I have too much data running at once. He says it looks like I never turn off." "Do you?" She considered this. "Less than I should," she said. "Probably." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." They were quiet for a moment. It was a strange quiet, the kind that happened between people who hadn't spent much time together but had somehow arrived at a level of conversation that usually took longer. He wasn't sure how they'd gotten there. He suspected she wasn't either, and that it unsettled her in the specific way that unexpected things unsettled people who ran their lives on predictability. "The accident," she said without preamble. "When I was in the elevator, I said before." He looked at her. "You don't have to explain that." "I know I don't." She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking out the window, not at him. "I was in a car accident 4 years ago. The spinal injury was complete. Before that, I didn't have any particular issues with enclosed spaces. After, there were a few months where I couldn't get into an elevator without—" She paused, selecting the word carefully. "Without significant difficulty. And now? Now it's manageable. 99% of the time, it's completely fine." A brief pause. "It was that 1%. He nodded once. Being stuck was different than the enclosed space itself. She looked at him. "Yes, exactly. A flicker of something, small surprise, maybe, at being understood quickly. The loss of exit was the problem, not the room." "That makes complete sense," he said, and he meant it plainly, without the particular gentleness that people used when they were trying to be careful about disability. He was just agreeing with a thing that was true. She looked at him for a second with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. It was not the filing look she usually had. It was something more raw than that, quickly covered. "Anyway," she said, and the word was the small door closing. "The maintenance log you sent was exceptionally detailed. I like to be thorough. It was 17 paragraphs long. The sensor had 4 separate calibration drift indicators," he said, with complete seriousness. "There were 3 bullet points about ambient temperature variance. Those were relevant to the drift pattern." The almost laugh came back. Caught again, but barely. "Read," she said. "Autumn," he said. They looked at each other across the conference room table, and something that had been building in the weeks since his daughter pressed every button in the elevator arrived at a kind of simple, acknowledged fact between them. Nothing spoken, nothing acted on, just seen. She picked up her tablet from the table. "I have a 4 o'clock. "Yeah," he said, standing. "I've got 2 more floors to tag." He picked up his own tablet and walked out, and he did not let himself think about anything until he was in the elevator with the doors closed. Then he stood there for a second with his eyes shut and thought, well, tut, he told nobody. There was nobody to tell, really. Carlos would make it a whole thing, Jimenez would never let him hear the end of it, and his sister in Baltimore would immediately start planning something. He processed it the way he processed most things, quietly, on his own, over time. What he did allow himself was this. When maintenance tasks came up on 42 that could reasonably be handled by him, he handled them himself. He kept it professional. He kept the visits to what the work required. But he stopped pretending there was a reason not to go up there because the pretense was its own kind of dishonesty, and he'd rather be honest with himself even if he didn't do anything about it. The visits were brief and businesslike. They talked about the building, mostly. She asked intelligent questions about infrastructure that showed she'd been thinking about things he'd mentioned in passing. He answered them without dumbing them down, which she seemed to appreciate in the specific way people appreciated not being managed. Sometimes she mentioned something about a project or a problem she was working through, not asking for input, just stating it, the way people did when they thought out loud, when they needed to hear the thing said. Once she mentioned that the Singapore deal had finally closed, with a flat, uninflected statement that he recognized as the way someone delivered news they were genuinely satisfied about, but had trained themselves not to perform happiness over. "That's the one you've been working on for 7 months, she said. "Yes." "Congratulations." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, and it came out like she meant it specifically, not generically. He thought about that on the elevator down, up ahead. The day Lily officially met Autumn, really met her, not the lobby incident, was an accident in the true sense of the word. It was a Friday in late October, and Lily had the afternoon off school for a teacher development day. Nathan's usual sitter had canceled that morning with minimal notice, which was becoming a pattern that he was going to have to address soon. He'd brought Lily in with the understanding that she would stay in the maintenance office with Carlos until Nathan was done for the day, with strict instructions about not touching the radio equipment and not pressing elevator buttons. By 2 in the afternoon, Carlos had let her have the radio to test, which was Nathan's fault for not specifically saying no. She cannot touch the radio equipment. He had said, don't touch it, which apparently in Lily's interpretation meant she could hold it if someone handed it to her. And somewhere between the radio and a long afternoon of being 6 years old in a basement office, she had started to drift. Nathan found out she drifted when his radio crackled at 2:47 p.m. with Darnell's voice saying, "Reed, your daughter is in the lobby reading the plant." She says the plant has a care tag and she wants to know who waters it. Nathan rubbed his face. "I'll be right there." But when he got to the lobby, Lily wasn't alone. Autumn was there, apparently just back from an external meeting, coat still on, her assistant Marcus a few steps behind her looking at his phone. Lily was explaining the plant's care tag to Autumn, who was stationary near the lobby's large potted ficus, coat still buttoned, with the expression of someone who had gotten pulled into a conversation they had not anticipated and were not trying to escape. "It says it needs indirect light," Lily was saying, pointing at the small placard. "But this part of the lobby has direct light in the afternoon because of that window, so whoever put this here made a mistake." Autumn looked at the window, then at the plant. "You're right," she said. "I've always thought that plant looked stressed." "Ficus are sensitive," Lily said, with the solemnity of someone who had recently learned this. "Where did you learn that?" "My teacher has one and she talks about it." Nathan arrived at the edge of this scene and opened his mouth to apologize and retrieve his daughter, and Autumn looked up at him with an expression that was, and he was fairly certain he was reading this correctly, not irritated. "She's been educating me," Autumn said. "She does that." "Dad!" Lily turned to him with the urgency of someone mid-point. "The ficus is in the wrong spot." "I heard. Someone should move it." "I'll put it on the list," he said, which was not a lie. He looked at Autumn. "Sorry, she wasn't bothering me." Autumn said it simply, and then she said to Lily, "You have a good eye. You should tell the building management what you told me." Lily considered this with great seriousness. "Would they listen?" "If you frame it as a plant welfare issue, possibly." Lily looked at her father. "Can I write a letter?" "We're going home soon, Lil." "After we go home." "Sure," he said. "After we go home." Lily turned back to Autumn, satisfied. "I'm going to write a letter," she reported. "Good," Autumn said. And then she did the thing he'd seen her almost do before, the thing she caught, except this time she didn't catch it. She smiled. Not a polished, boardroom-appropriate smile, but a real one, slightly crooked, like it had gotten out before she decided whether to let it. It was there for a second and a half, and then it was gone, and she turned her chair toward the elevator. "Have a good evening, Reed." "You too, Autumn." He watched her go, and beside him, Lily watched too. "She smiled," Lily said. "I saw." "She doesn't do that very much, does she?" Nathan looked down at his daughter. "What makes you say that?" "Because when she did it, it looked like it surprised her," Lily said, with the simple accuracy of children who hadn't yet learned to look away from things. Mussim. The letter about the ficus was 3 sentences long in Lily's best handwriting, submitted to the building management office's physical mailbox on the lobby level the following Monday. Nathan slipped it in after morning rounds, because Lily had left it in his jacket pocket with a post-it note that said, "Don't forget Dad" in large letters. The ficus was moved 4 days later. He didn't know who authorized it. But when he walked through the lobby that Thursday and saw the plant relocated to a better-lit corner, he felt something simple and slightly ridiculous, and he didn't try to talk himself out of it. November came in cold and serious. The city shifted gears, coats out, people moving faster on the sidewalks, a particular smell in the air that was something between exhaust and wood smoke and the specific cold of a New York morning. Nathan walked Lily to school every day and then walked the 8 blocks to Orion Tower, and the walk was one of his favorite parts of the day. The 20 minutes where he was just a man in the city, not an employee or a single father or any other thing, just a person moving through the morning. He had started noticing how often he thought about the 42nd floor. Not obsessively, not in a way that disrupted his work or his evenings with Lily, but it was there. The way certain things were there at the edge of your thinking, present without demanding attention. He'd be watching Lily do her homework, and his mind would drift to something Autumn had said about the Singapore infrastructure rollout, a detail that had been interesting to him because it paralleled a logistics challenge he'd had years ago with a commercial property in Queens. He'd be fixing himself dinner and find himself thinking about the conference room. That afternoon, the almost laugh. He was, he recognized, in the early stages of a situation that was going to require some honest accounting. He was a maintenance worker. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar technology company. These were not comparable positions in any professional or social sense, and he was not naive about that. He was also 32 years old and had spent 3 years keeping his head down and his expectations small. And there was something in him, quiet and stubborn, that was beginning to resist the smallness. He didn't do anything about it. He kept the visits professional. He did not manufacture reasons to have extra conversations. But when the building's annual safety inspection required a sit-down briefing with building tenants on emergency protocols, and when that briefing was scheduled for 42 at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday, Nathan conducted it himself instead of sending Carlos. Autumn was the only representative from Sinclair Technologies in the room. She'd told Marcus to field the morning's other calls, and she'd handle the inspection briefing, which Marcus had noted on the schedule with the specific neutrality of an assistant who had observations but had learned not to share them. The briefing was 30 minutes. Nathan went through the emergency procedures, the exit protocols, the updates to the fire suppression system, the changes to elevator emergency response since the October incident. He was professional and thorough and didn't rush any of it. She asked 2 questions, one about the new elevator response protocol and one about a detail in the suppression system upgrade that demonstrated she had actually read the safety materials he'd distributed, which most tenants did not do. After the formal part, he was packing up his materials when she said, "Lily, does she like the park?" He paused. "She loves the park." "Why?" "I was in Central Park on Saturday." Autumn seemed to be choosing words carefully, not from rehearsal but from genuine uncertainty about something, which was a quality he hadn't seen in her before, the slight hesitation of someone not on familiar ground. There were children playing in the leaf piles near the 72nd Street entrance. I thought about what she said, about fall because of the leaves. He looked at her. She was looking at her tablet, not at him, with the slight self-consciousness of someone who had said something more personal than they meant to. "She's going to the park Saturday," he said. "If you—" He stopped himself. She looked up. He made a decision he couldn't entirely justify. "I was going to take her Saturday morning. If you wanted to, I don't know. There's a good coffee cart near the 72nd entrance." The room was quiet. He was aware of exactly how much was packed into a question like that. The shape of it, what it implied, the distance between their respective positions on every axis that mattered professionally and socially. He was also aware that he was tired of doing the math on things like this, and that the math had never once led him somewhere that felt like living. Autumn looked at him with the same direct attention she always had, but something in it was different now. She was not filing this, not processing it with the part of her that processed information efficiently. She was sitting with it. That would be... She paused. Lily would have to be okay with that. Lily thinks you're nice. Lily thinks everyone is nice. Actually, she's pretty selective, Nathan said. She told me our neighbor on the 4th floor is suspicious, based on his male habits. This time, the almost laugh made it all the way out. Autumn. Sinclair laughed, short, real, caught off guard, the kind of laugh that happened when the reflex beat the control. She pressed her mouth shut after, but it had already happened. "Suspicious how?" she said. "He gets packages almost every day. She says nobody buys that many things legitimately." She might be right. "I've thought about it," he admitted. She was quiet for a moment, still with the trace of the laugh in her face, that younger quality, that unguardedness, the version of her that existed when she wasn't performing anything. "Saturday," she said. "The 72nd entrance." 10 o'clock, he said. "She's usually pretty functional by 10. "I'll be there," Autumn said. He nodded and picked up his materials and walked to the elevator and pressed the button for sub-basement 2, and when the doors closed, he stood there with his back against the wall of the cab and stared at the floor indicator and thought, well, okay then. He told Lily that evening while she was eating dinner. Autumn's going to meet us at the park Saturday, he said, keeping it casual, keeping his attention on his own plate. The one near 72nd. Lily put her fork down. She looked at him with the particular focus that 6-year-olds deployed when they were processing something important. The Autumn from the building? She said. Yeah. The one with the wheelchair. Yeah. Who smiled at me about the ficus? That's the one. Lily picked her fork back up. Okay, she said. He waited. With Lily, there was often more after the first okay. Dad? She said. Yeah. Are you nervous? He looked up from his plate. His daughter was watching him with the frank, patient attention she'd had since she was about 4. That way of seeing him clearly that sometimes reminded him of Claire so sharply it took a second to find his footing. A little, he said, because she deserved honest. Lily considered this. She's nervous too, she said. You could probably tell her. He looked at his daughter. What makes you think she's nervous? Because she moved the ficus, Lily said simply, and went back to her dinner. Nathan sat there for a moment with that. He did not ask his 6-year-old to explain her reasoning because he was almost certain it would make complete sense, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. Saturday came with the kind of clear, cold sky that New York occasionally produced in November, as if to remind people why they stayed. The light sharp and clean, the air cold enough to feel real, the park loud with children and dogs, and the particular noise of a city trying to use its last decent weekend before winter made everything harder. Autumn arrived at the 72nd Street entrance at 9:58. She had told herself, the night before, that this was not a significant thing. It was a park. She had been to Central Park many times. She went on Saturday mornings occasionally when the work pressure reached a level that even she acknowledged required a 30-minute reset. She knew the paths, she knew which sections had adequate surface for the chair, she knew where the coffee cart was. This was familiar geography. What was not familiar was arriving somewhere with the low-grade awareness that someone was going to be glad to see her. Not glad in the professional sense. Not the carefully managed warmth of people who needed something from her. Just glad. The uncomplicated kind. She was not sure she had experienced that in long enough that the anticipation of it felt strange, like using a muscle you'd forgotten. She saw them before they saw her. Nathan was walking along the path from the 72nd Street side, Lily's hand in his, and Lily was already talking. She could see the animation of it from 40 feet away, the way Lily's free hand gestured at something in the trees, and Nathan was listening with his full attention, the way he did, that quality of giving whatever was in front of him his actual focus instead of the performance of it. Then Lily spotted her, and the hand gesturing stopped, and she pulled her father forward at a pace that made him lengthen his stride. And Autumn felt something shift in her chest, small, warm, slightly alarming. You came, Lily said, arriving in front of her with the directness of someone who had considered it might not happen. I said I would, Autumn said. Lily seemed to file this, the fact that Autumn kept her word, as information of some importance. Dad brought coffee, she said. He made it himself because he says the cart is not worth it. Nathan held up a thermos with the slight expression of a man being lightly exposed. The cart charges $6 for what is essentially hot water that looked at coffee beans, he said. That's an accurate description of a lot of coffee in this city, Autumn said. Thank you. He said it with a faint air of vindication. They found a path that worked, wide enough, surface stable, and moved into the park together, and it was not smooth. These things were not smooth. There were moments of awkward navigation when the path narrowed and Nathan moved without asking to check the surface ahead of her, which was both considerate and the kind of thing that could tip into condescension depending on how it was done. He did it the right way, quickly, without commentary, without making it a moment. She noticed that. She filed it in the category of things about him that continued to complicate her sense of what she was doing here. Lily walked between them and talked about leaves, about a friend at school named Deja, who she had mixed feelings about whether squirrels actually remembered where they buried things or were just lucky. Nathan said he thought they remembered most of them. Autumn said there was research suggesting squirrels had better spatial memory than their reputation implied. Lily looked between them. You both know things, Lily said. That's the goal, Nathan said. My teacher says everybody knows different things, and that's why we need other people. She paused. I think that's why you like each other. Nathan looked at the sky. Autumn looked at the path. You like each other, Lily clarified helpfully, in case they'd missed the point. Lily, Nathan said, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. Okay, she said brightly, and ran toward a pile of leaves someone had raked to the side of the path. Autumn kept her face neutral, which took some effort. She could feel Nathan not looking at her with the same deliberateness. I apologize, he said. Don't, she said. And then, because she was apparently doing things today that she had not planned, she's not wrong. He turned to look at her. She kept her eyes on the path ahead. No, he said, after a moment. She's not. The coffee from the thermos was, in fact, much better than the cart. She drank it from the small cup he'd thought to bring, and they sat on a bench, him on the bench, her beside it, while Lily conducted a private investigation of the leaf pile 20 feet away, and the city moved around them, and neither of them said anything for a while. And it was the most comfortable silence Autumn had experienced in longer than she could accurately calculate. She thought, this is what I've been avoiding. Not the man, not the child, but this, the specific vulnerability of something being genuinely good. Because things that were genuinely good could be taken away, and she had gotten very efficient at not having things that could be taken away. She did not say this out loud, but she thought it, sitting in the November light with coffee going warm in her hands. Timt. They met in the park 2 more Saturdays after that. The second time, Lily brought a notebook and asked to document the types of birds they saw. And Autumn spent 40 minutes identifying bird species from the photos Lily took on Nathan's phone with more accuracy than he'd expected, which caused Lily to look at her with an expression that suggested she had moved into a new and elevated category of person. The third time it rained, and they ended up in a coffee shop on Columbus Avenue that was too small and too loud, and had nowhere good for the wheelchair except a corner spot near the bathroom, which Autumn navigated without comment. And they stayed for 2 hours because Lily had ordered hot chocolate and was taking it extremely seriously, and Nathan had made her laugh 3 separate times. Real laughter, the kind that happened before she could assess whether it was appropriate. Priya noticed first. Priya Mehta had been Autumn's general counsel for 2 years, and her closest thing to a friend for 3, and she had the particular quality of intelligent people who paid close attention. She noticed things before she mentioned them, which meant by the time she mentioned them, she was certain. She appeared in Autumn's office doorway on a Monday afternoon in late November, closed the door behind her, and said, "Who is he?" Autumn looked up from her laptop. "Excuse me? You've left the building 3 Saturdays in a row before noon, and you've been—" Priya made a gesture that was hard to categorize. "Different. I go out on Saturdays. You go out on Saturdays to walk laps around the block and come back. These are 2 and 3 hour absences, and you came in this morning and you didn't immediately tell Marcus to restructure the Hendricks call. You just worked, normally, like someone who'd had a weekend." Autumn held Priya's gaze for a moment. "You're reading a great deal into scheduling." "Autumn." Priya sat down. "I'm your lawyer and possibly your only friend, and I'm not reading into anything. I'm observing correctly." A pause. "Who is he?" Autumn closed her laptop. She considered lying, which was her default when the question was personal, but Priya would see through it, and they both knew it, and lying to Priya felt like a waste of the one relationship she actually valued. "His name is Nathan Reed," she said. "He's the head of maintenance in this building." Priya received this information without the reaction Autumn had been bracing for. No visible alarm, no immediate pivot to liability and optics. "Tell me about him," she said instead. So Autumn told her. Not everything. She kept certain parts of it private, the way she kept things private. The elevator, the conference room, the quality of the silences, but the outline. Single father, daughter named Lily. 12 years in building maintenance, coffee, in the park. The way he listened. Priya sat very still for most of it. When Autumn finished, Priya said, "You should be careful." "I know." "Not because of him," Priya clarified. "I don't know him, but because of the board and the investors. You know how they read things." "Yes." "The optics of—" "I know the optics, Priya." They looked at each other. Priya had the expression of someone who understood that giving advice and being heard were two different things, and who had decided to give the advice anyway. "Be careful," she said again, softer. "And also—" She paused. "I'm glad you have a Saturday." Autumn looked out the window. "So am I," she said, "which is the part that worries me." Then, the photo appeared on a Tuesday. She did not see it herself. Marcus saw it at 7 in the morning and came into her office 10 minutes earlier than usual with the particular facial expression of someone delivering bad news they'd been organizing themselves to deliver. "There's a thing," he said. "What kind of thing?" He turned his tablet around. It was a photo taken in Central Park, the second Saturday, the one with the bird notebook. Someone had taken it from a distance. A long lens, probably, though it wasn't a professional shot. Autumn in her wheelchair, Nathan beside the bench, Lily mid-laugh at something off camera. The framing was accidental, the way candid shots were, but the angle had caught something. The lean of Nathan's posture toward her, the way she'd been looking at Lily with an unguarded expression that she would never have permitted if she'd known someone was watching. The caption on the business news site that had run it read, "Sinclair Tech CEO Autumn." Sinclair, seen here with unidentified man and child, raises questions about the executive's personal focus as the company prepares for its Q1 product launch. Sources close to the board say some members have noted behavioral changes in recent months. She read it twice. She handed the tablet back to Marcus. "Cancel my 9 o'clock, she said. "Already done." He hesitated. "There are 4 more articles this morning. The financial blogs picked it up overnight." "Same photo?" 2 are using it. The others are commentary." "What kind of commentary?" Marcus pressed his lips together. "The kind that connects your wheelchair to words like vulnerable and compromised judgment." The room was quiet for a moment. Autumn put her hands flat on the desk. She felt the particular coldness that settled into her when something went wrong that she hadn't seen coming. Not panic, nothing like panic, just the cold precision of a mind calculating damage and response simultaneously. "Get me Priya," she said, quiet. The board meeting was called for Thursday. Not a formal meeting, a conversation, in the careful language of Elliot Marsh, who chaired the board and who had the practiced delicacy of a man who had spent 40 years saying difficult things in the gentlest possible framing. He called her personally, which was itself a signal. "Autumn," he said, "I want to handle this carefully." "Then say it plainly, Elliot." A brief pause. "Some board members have concerns, not about your performance. The Q3 numbers are exceptional. The Singapore close was precisely what we needed. The concerns are about—" He chose the word with audible care. "Perception." "Perception of what?" "Of your judgment, of your stability, particularly given the timing, with the product launch and the Hendricks partnership still—" "Elliot," she kept her voice level, "are you telling me that the board is questioning my competence because I was photographed in a public park?" "They're questioning my competence," she said again, more precisely, "because that is what this is. Not perception, not optics. They're looking at a photo of me outside on a Saturday and concluding that something must be wrong with my judgment. And I think we should be clear about what that actually means." A longer pause. "The conversation Thursday will be, I'll be there," she said. "Thank you for calling." She ended the call and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. The city was outside the window, doing its indifferent Tuesday thing. Traffic and clouds and the distant noise of construction somewhere on 49th. She thought about the photo. She thought about her own face in it, the unguarded expression, the way she'd been looking at Lily with something she hadn't shown this building in 4 years. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Nathan. Short, factual. "There's a photo. It's going to be a complicated week. I wanted you to know before you heard from someone else." She put the phone down. 40 seconds later, it buzzed. "I saw it. Are you okay? She looked at the question for a long moment. 3 words, but the directness of them. Not what do you need? Not let me know if there's anything I can do. Just, are you okay? The simplest possible question. She typed back, professionally, it's manageable. Personally, I'm working on it. His reply came quickly. That's honest. Thank you for telling me. And then, after a pause, Lily wants to know if you've eaten lunch. She's made it her thing to ask people that now. I told her you probably had people for that. She said that wasn't the same. Autumn read this twice. Then she typed, tell her no. And she's right that it's not the same. She put the phone face down on the desk and went back to work. And the city kept moving outside the glass, and somewhere below her, the building breathed the way it always did at midday, when everyone was in and the systems were running at full load. The Thursday board meeting was held in the 43rd floor conference room, the building's executive meeting space, which Sinclair Technologies rented for events. 10 board members around the table, several of them with the particular careful blankness of people who had been in many difficult conversations and had learned to show nothing in advance. Elliot Marsh opened with his usual framework. He appreciated everyone's time. This was a productive conversation. The company's performance spoke for itself. Autumn sat at one end of the table and let him finish. Then Diane Cho, who held the third largest shareholder stake and had always had the specific kind of ambition that wore the face of concern, said, Autumn, we care about you. That's the foundation of everything I'm about to say. Autumn looked at her steadily. Go ahead, Diane. The photo is a symptom. What we're actually discussing is whether the focus required for the next 6 months, the launch, the Hendrix finalization, the Series D conversations, is present in the way we need it to be. A deliberate pause. There have been changes in the last 2 months. Your schedule has gaps that didn't exist before. Your Saturday availability has shifted. Marcus has noted 3 occasions where you've requested information that seemed tangential to the business needs. Tangential, Autumn said. Research into Central Park accessibility. A bird identification app purchased through the corporate account. That was $17. It's not about the amount. What is it about, Diane? Not a question. A blade slid between the careful framing. Diane looked at her. We need to know that your personal situation is not creating vulnerabilities in your judgment. The room was very quiet. Autumn looked down the table at 10 people who had, collectively, trusted her to grow a company from $60 million to just over $1 billion in market valuation. Some of them she respected. Some of them had been waiting for 4 years for some evidence that the woman in the wheelchair who had refused to be anything other than formidable was, in fact, not. Let me be clear about what I'm hearing, she said. Her voice was completely even. You are suggesting that I spend time with a person outside this building, and that this represents a compromise of my judgment. You are using words like vulnerable and focus and stability. And I want you to consider, Shai, carefully, before anyone responds, whether you would be having this conversation if the photograph were of a different CEO. One who did not use a wheelchair, one who had not, in your framework, already used up some implicit allowance by being the kind of CEO you didn't entirely expect. Several faces shifted. Elliot Marsh looked at the table. That's not just... Diane began. I'm not finished. Autumn let the sentence settle for a moment. I have delivered 11 consecutive quarters of growth. I have closed the largest partnership in this company's history. I have done those things while building back from an injury that should have, by the logic of several people in this room, ended my tenure in this role. And you are questioning my judgment because I was photographed in a park. She paused. Is that what we're doing? The silence that followed was a specific kind. The silence of people recalibrating, of a room that had come in with a posture and found the ground shifted. Elliot cleared his throat. No one is questioning your performance record, Autumn. That's not... Then what are you prepared to do about it? She said. Specifically, what is the resolution of this conversation? Another pause. Diane and the 2 members beside her exchanged a glance that was meant to be subtle and was not. We'd like assurance, Diane said carefully, that the personal matter will not... The answer is no, Autumn said. Diane blinked. I'm sorry? The answer to the unasked question, the one you've been building to, is no. I will not be providing assurances about my personal life to a board of directors in exchange for their continued confidence in leadership I have already earned. She looked at Elliot. If the board wants to have a formal confidence vote, we can schedule that. I welcome that conversation, but this one is done. She turned her chair and moved toward the door, and behind her the room stayed very quiet, and she did not look back. In the elevator, descending to 42, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The exposure of it, the anger, the particular exhaustion of having to prove herself in ways that had nothing to do with what she had built. She had known this was coming, in some form. She had seen it building for weeks, but knowing something was coming did not entirely prepare you for the moment it arrived. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. And then she looked at the preview and realized with a sharp, cold shock that it was not a number she didn't recognize. It was a journalist. A business journalist at a financial outlet she knew, whose name she knew, and whose message read, "Autumn. I'm running a story on the board situation tonight. I have a source. Wanted to give you a right of reply before publication." She stared at the phone. Someone in that room had walked out and made a call before the elevator doors even closed. The doors opened on 42. She sat there for a moment, in the empty corridor, and looked at the message, and felt the company she had built, the thing she had remade herself around, the structure that had held her upright for 4 years, begin to tremble in a way she had not felt since the night of the accident. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She typed back, "My office, 1 hour," and then she typed a message to Priya that said, "I need you now." And then she put the phone in her lap and sat in the corridor of the 42nd floor and looked at the building she had occupied for 3 years, her building, her floor, the walls she had put everything she had into making impenetrable, and thought about a man in a park, about a thermos of coffee made at home because the cart wasn't worth $6, about a little girl writing a letter about a ficus. She thought, "I am not sorry." Then she went inside and got to work. The story ran that evening. It was not as bad as it could have been, which Priya said 3 times in a row as they read it together in Autumn's office at 8 p.m., as if repetition would make it feel better. The journalist, to his credit, or to the credit of his editors, had not run the most inflammatory version available to him. He had quoted the unnamed board source carefully, framed the piece as a question rather than a verdict, and included Autumn's single-sentence right of reply. Sinclair Technologies' performance record speaks for itself, and Ms. Sinclair's leadership remains fully committed to the company's strategic priorities. But the headline read, "Sinclair Tech CEO's Judgment Under Board Scrutiny." Amid personal entanglement, and headlines were what people read, and headlines were what got screenshotted and circulated, and by morning it had been picked up by 4 more outlets, and by the afternoon it had 1,700 comments on the financial news aggregator that most of their investor class read. The comments were the part Autumn made herself read. Priya said she didn't have to. She did it anyway, the way you pressed on a bruise, not because you wanted it to hurt, but because you needed to know its exact edges. Most of the comments were what she expected, questions about her capability, the word distracted appearing with a frequency that was almost rhythmic, several references to the wheelchair that wore the clothing of concern. She's been through so much, it's understandable that she'd be vulnerable, which was the most infuriating register of all because it was the one you couldn't argue with directly without sounding defensive. And underneath those, the ones from women in business, in tech, in boardrooms, who wrote things like, "We know exactly what this is, and they would never write this story about a male CEO, and she built that company from nothing, and they are waiting for any excuse." Autumn read those too, filed them. She turned off her computer at 9:30 and went home. p.m. Nathan was awake when the story ran. He saw it on his phone in the kitchen after Lily was in bed. He read it twice and then sat there with the phone face down on the table and worked through what he felt about it, which was a process he took seriously because feeling things imprecisely led to responding to them imprecisely. What he felt was anger, which was clean and simple, concern, which was directed at her and was mixed with the particular helplessness of having no role in a situation that affected someone he stopped at the edge of that sentence and held it, someone he cared about. That was the accurate word. He was past the point of soft pedaling it to himself, past the point of interesting person and unexpected connection. He cared about her the way you cared about someone whose specific face your brain produced without prompting, whose voice you recognized in a memory before you remembered the context. The feeling had arrived so gradually and then so completely that trying to locate when it had happened was like trying to find where a tide started. He did not text her that night. She would have Priya and lawyers and the full machinery of crisis response, and she did not need him adding another voice to the noise. What he could offer was the thing he'd always offered, just being steady on the other end of the line without adding to the weight. He went to bed and slept badly and got up at 5:30 to make Lily's lunch and walk her to school. And when he came into the building at 7 a.m., he was quiet in the way he got quiet when he was thinking hard about something he hadn't resolved yet. Darnell at the front desk looked at him. "You saw the thing," he said. "Yeah." "For what it's worth," Darnell said, "I've watched her come in this building every morning for 3 years. She seems," he searched for the word, "more herself lately, whatever that means." Nathan nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "She does." He went to do his rounds. She came to him. That was the part he didn't expect. He was on the 22nd floor doing a water pressure check when his phone lit up with her name. Not a text, a call, which she had never done before. He picked up on the second ring. "Are you in the building?" she asked. 22. You need me upstairs?" "No." A pause. "I'm coming down." He stood in the corridor of 22 and waited, and 3 minutes later the elevator opened and she came out, and she was not in her usual state. She was put together. She was always put together, but there was something underneath it today that was uncontained in a way he hadn't seen, like she had been managing something at high pressure for 48 hours, and the seal was beginning to stress. "I have a problem," she said. "Not preamble, not build-up. Tell me." "The board is calling a formal confidence vote. Elliot told me this morning. Diane Cho has been working the phones for 2 days, and she has enough aligned members to make it a genuine question." She stopped her chair 10 feet from him and folded her hands in her lap with the deliberateness of someone physically containing something. "The vote is in 10 days. At the Meridian Gala, the annual charity event where we typically present the company's year-end highlights to our investor class. Diane wants to use it as the venue to publicly move against me. At a charity gala. It's her style. Public settings, where the audience affects the outcome." Autumn's jaw was set. She's been positioned for this for over a year. The photo gave her the opening she needed. He looked at her. He was calculating things quickly, the way he calculated building problems. What was structural, what was cosmetic, what was load-bearing, and what would fail first. "What do you need?" he said. "I don't know." She said it plainly, without the usual precision, and that plainness, the admission of not knowing, told him more about how bad it was than any of the details. Autumn Sinclair always knew what she needed. Precise requirements, clearly stated. The uncertainty was new. "Can you win the vote?" he asked. "I don't know that either. On numbers? Possibly. But Diane is good at this. She has cultivated relationships on that board for 3 years. She'll have proxies I haven't identified." A pause. "And she is specifically using the argument that I have become emotionally compromised. The photo is Exhibit A. If I walk into that vote looking like I'm defending my right to a personal life, she frames it as confirmation. And if you walk in having distanced yourself from," he started. "From you," she said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "That's the other option. Distance. Make the question irrelevant by removing the answer." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, one of the building's secondary HVAC units cycled on with its usual low hum. He understood the shape of what she was saying. She was not asking him to make the decision for her. She was telling him the geometry of the problem, the way she told him building problems, laying out the constraints and variables, and asking him to think alongside her rather than at her. "Is that what you want?" he said. "Distance?" She looked at him for a moment with that direct attention that he had come to understand was her version of an answer she hadn't finished yet. "No," she said. But what I want, and what the situation requires, Autumn. She stopped. What do you want? He said, not repeating it as a challenge, just keeping it there, in the air, until she dealt with it. She was quiet for a moment that had weight in it. Outside, 48 floors below, the city was doing its 10 a.m. thing, loud and indifferent and moving fast. I want to go to the gala and not pretend, she said. I want to stand in that room in front of every investor and board member and say what is actually true, which is that I am the same CEO I have always been, and the only thing that has changed is that I am less miserable than I was a year ago. And those two things are not in conflict. She paused. I want to stop performing the version of myself that makes other people comfortable with what I survived. He stood very still. He knew better than to move when someone was saying something that cost them. I've been doing it for 4 years, she said, making it very clear that nothing touched me, that the accident changed nothing, that I needed nothing and no one. She was looking at the floor now, not at him, and he recognized the posture, the effort of looking somewhere that wasn't a face when the thing being said was too raw to say to a face. Because if I let people see that any of it affected me, they would use it. They would call it weakness. They were always going to call it weakness. A pause. And they're calling it weakness anyway. Yeah, he said quietly, so I might as well stop paying the price to prevent it. He nodded slowly. He thought about what it took to arrive at a statement like that. The accounting required, the willingness to look at the cost of your own defenses and decide they were no longer worth paying. What's the gala? He said. Practically, what's the format? She looked up. Dinner for 400. Seated speeches, company presentations, awards. I give a keynote. She paused. It was always going to be a platform. Diane wants to use it as hers. I could make it mine. Do you know what you'd say? Not yet. A long pause. But I'm beginning to. Adjusts. The next 8 days were the hardest she had worked in years. Not because the work itself was harder. The Q4 reports, the launch preparation, the Hendrix finalization, all of it continued at the same pace. It was hard because she was doing the work and simultaneously carrying the knowledge of Thursday night, of what she had decided in a corridor on the 22nd floor, without any certainty about whether it was the right decision or the one that would cost her everything. Priya thought she was making a mistake. She said so once, directly, in the way Priya did, not repeatedly, not with pressure, but clearly and on the record. You can win the confidence vote on numbers if you work the next week right. You don't need to do this the hard way. I know, Autumn said. Then why? Because the hard way is the honest way, she said, and I'm tired of the other kind. Priya looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said, then let me help you do the hard way right. They worked on the speech together. Priya on the structural and legal exposure, Autumn on the actual words, which she wrote herself and rewrote 4 times and hated each draft in a different way. She was not a natural public speaker in the emotional register. She was excellent at clear, structured argument, at data presentation, at the kind of boardroom authority that came from precision. The thing the speech required was different. It required her to be specific about things she had kept in the abstract for 4 years. Nathan didn't see the speech before the gala. She thought about sending it to him and decided against it. The speech was her work, her problem. What he had given her, in a corridor on the 22nd floor, in a park in November, in an elevator intercom in October, was not a speech. It was simpler than that. He had given her the experience of being treated like a person and not a symbol, repeatedly, without making a thing of it, and that was what the speech was actually about. She didn't need his notes on the draft. She needed him to show up. She asked him on the Wednesday before. Not formally. A text, in the evening, after she knew Lily was in bed. The gala is Thursday at the Meridian. It's black tie. I know that's an ask. A pause, then, I would like you to be there. Not as anything formal, just there. If you're willing. 3 minutes passed. Then, what time? She exhaled something she hadn't known she was holding. 7. I'll put your name at the door. Okay. She looked at the screen for a moment, then typed, Lily will need a sitter. Already thinking about it. And then, Autumn, yes. Whatever happens Thursday, you built that company. Nobody in that room built it. You did. She sat with that for a long time. But the Meridian Hotel ballroom was everything these events always were. Too much chandelier light, tables arranged with the precision of a room designed to make wealth look natural. 400 people in formal wear who had been doing this long enough that the performance of it was invisible even to themselves. Autumn arrived at 7:15 and she could feel the room shift when she came in. The particular shift of a room that had been talking about you adjusting to your presence. She had dressed for this in the specific way she dressed when she intended to be seen. Deep green, silk, architectural cut, her hair up. No concessions, no softening. Priya met her near the entrance and said quietly, "Diane is at table 6. She's got Harmon and Westfeld with her." 2 board members who had been neutral as of Monday. "She's been working the room for 45 minutes. "Let her work," Autumn said. "Your table is at the front. Elliot's already seated." "How does he look?" "Like a man who wants this to end without anyone getting hurt." "Same as always, then." She scanned the room. "Has he arrived?" Priya knew who she meant. "Not yet." Autumn nodded and moved toward her table. "He arrived at 7:32. She knew because she saw Priya look toward the entrance and then look at her. And when she turned, Nathan was at the door. Black tie, slightly imperfect. The kind of formal dress that a man wore well because he filled it with something real, rather than because he'd been wearing it his whole life. He looked around the room with the same steady attention he used on buildings, reading the layout, the load, the points of stress. She caught his eye from across the room. He didn't wave, didn't do anything theatrical. He just acknowledged her with a small nod. Steady, present. And she turned back to her table and felt something in her spine relax that she hadn't known was braced. Dinner happened. Speeches happened. 2 company presentations, an award ceremony, the kind of event architecture that moved 400 people through 3 hours in formal clothing without anyone visibly losing patience. Diane Cho gave a brief remarks segment, framed as a reflection on the company's growth, and buried inside it a pointed remark about leadership needing to remain focused on what brought us here, at a pivotal moment of transition. Smooth, professional. Everyone in the room who understood how these things worked heard the blade inside it. Everyone else heard a compliment. Autumn's keynote was last. She took the microphone at 9:47. The room settled into the particular quiet of an audience preparing for something expected, a polished wrap-up, the numbers, the gratitude, the company forward look. She looked out at 400 faces and took one breath. "I've given this speech before," she said. "I know how it's supposed to go. The numbers, which are excellent. The partnerships. The launch timeline. The thank yous." She paused. "I'm going to give you all of that, but I'm going to say something first that isn't in the prepared remarks, and I'm saying it because I'm done with prepared remarks on the subject." The room was very still. 4 years ago, I was in an accident that changed my body and my life. I came back to this company 41 days later because I had decided that the only acceptable response was to make it irrelevant. The wheelchair, the injury, the fear, all of it. I decided that the only way to hold what I had built was to show everyone in every room that nothing had touched me. She kept her voice even, not performing composure, actually composed. That performance cost a great deal. It cost me a kind of loneliness I was not willing to look at directly, because looking at it directly would have confirmed something I didn't want to confirm, that I had survived something, and surviving it had changed me. She let that settle. "Someone showed me something different this year." Her eyes moved briefly to the back of the room, just briefly. "A person who looked at me without the need to see a symbol, or a verdict, or a proof of anything. And in that ordinary, simple thing, I understood what I had been missing, not the company's success, not the growth metrics, not the validation of a board or a market or a press cycle." A pause. Just someone who showed up the same way every time, who asked if I was okay and meant it, whose daughter wrote a 3-sentence letter about a plant and changed something in this building. She heard a small sound from someone at a nearby table. Not laughter, something softer. "There are people in this room tonight who believe that my having a personal life is evidence of compromised judgment.
I want to speak to that directly because I believe it deserves directness.
She felt the room's temperature shift, the alert quality of 400 people understanding that something real was being said. The opposite is true. I am a better leader now than I was a year ago. Not because I am more capable technically, I was always capable, but because I have been reminded what capacity is for. It is not for protecting an empire. It is for building something worth having. She held the room. Sinclair Technologies has grown because this team is exceptional. That does not change. But I'm also allowed to be a person who builds more than a company. Those things are not in conflict, and I will not apologize for either. The silence in the room was the kind that preceded a response, not the kind that meant nothing was happening. She moved smoothly into the prepared remarks. The numbers, the Singapore close, the Q1 launch roadmap, the Hendrix partnership finalization, and she delivered them with the same precision she always had, because the capability had always been real, and the point was that it coexisted with everything else she had just said. When she finished, the applause started at the front tables and moved backward. Not unanimous, she could see the held stillness at table 6, Diane Cho's expression carefully managed. But the room was clapping, and several people were standing, and Elliot Marsh at her table was applauding with the relief of a man watching something difficult resolve more cleanly than he'd feared. She set the microphone down and looked toward the back of the room. Nathan was standing near the wall, not clapping the way everyone else was clapping. He was just looking at her with an expression she would spend a long time remembering. Not pride exactly, not relief, something more like recognition. The expression of someone who had known a thing about her before she said it out loud, and was simply watching her arrive at it herself. She left the stage and moved through the room toward him, and people stepped aside and said things to her that she heard and answered, and the noise of the ballroom was around her, but she moved through it steadily, directly, until she reached the back wall. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." In front of 400 people and whatever board member is still watching, she looked at him directly. "I would like to go on a proper date with you. I would like to do this on a night when neither of us has a crisis to manage, when Lily is with a sitter, and when I have had the chance to wear something that does not have the structural integrity of formal armor." She paused. "Those are my terms." He looked at her for a long moment. The almost smile she had seen in a conference room 2 months ago, the one he usually kept to himself, came all the way out. "That's a very formal proposal," he said. "I do most things formally," she said. "I'm working on it." "Yeah," he said. "I know." He held her gaze. "Saturday, dinner. Somewhere with bad lighting and good food and nowhere important to be." "Yes," she said. "That." The room was still making noise around them, and across it Diane Cho was having a low, urgent conversation with Harmon, and Priya was somewhere in the middle distance watching with an expression of someone filing notes for later, and the chandelier light was too bright, and the music had started, and none of it touched the particular quality of that 2 feet of space between them. "Your speech," Nathan said. "Yes?" The ficus letter made it in. "It earned its place," she said. He laughed, short and real. And she felt it the way she felt the things he did that were real, directly, without the usual buffer. The city was outside, below all these floors and all this glass, doing what it always did. And in the building that housed the empire she had built from grief and fear and sheer refusal to be less than she was, something had changed in the way that real changes happened. Not in a moment, but arriving completely by the time you noticed it. She had stopped pretending she was fine with being alone. That was all. That was everything. The morning after the gala, Autumn's phone started at 6:14 and did not stop. She had expected this. She had, in fact, anticipated the shape of the next 48 hours with reasonable accuracy before she fell asleep the night before. The investor calls, the press cycle, the board fallout, the particular noise that followed any public moment where a powerful person said something true instead of something managed. She had set her alarm for 6 and beaten it by 16 minutes, lying awake in her apartment in the specific stillness of someone who had done an irreversible thing and was now waiting for the world to respond to it. The first 3 calls were expected. Elliot Marsh, Priya, and a journalist from a trade publication who had been in the room and wanted a follow-up comment. She handled all three before 7. Elliot said the speech had been extraordinary and that the confidence vote was, in his assessment, no longer viable. Diane had lost the room before the applause finished. Priya said she'd been up since 5 and that 17 major investors had already sent communications, 14 positive, 3 neutral, none explicitly negative. The journalist got a no comment, politely delivered. The fourth call was from her mother, which she let go to voicemail because her mother would want to talk for 40 minutes, and she didn't have 40 minutes, and also because the voicemail her mother left would allow her to prepare before responding, which was how she handled her mother as a general principle. She made coffee, her own, at home, the way Nathan had taught her without technically teaching her, just by making it in front of her enough times that she had absorbed his method through proximity. And she sat at her kitchen table with the phone face up and worked through the message queue methodically. By 8:30, the shape of the response was clear. The speech had been covered by 6 outlets by sunrise, ranging from cautious admiration to genuine warmth, and the framing across most of them was some version of the same thing. Sinclair Technologies' CEO delivers unexpectedly personal keynote that shifts conversation from governance questions to leadership values. The financial commentators were more measured, noting that the move was high risk and that the board situation remained unresolved. One prominent investor newsletter had already published a short piece with the headline, "Is Autumn Sinclair's leadership actually stronger for this?" Diane Cho sent a formal email at 9 a.m. addressed to all board members, withdrawing her request for a confidence vote. The language was professional and measured and completely without warmth, and it ended with a sentence about looking forward to continued collaboration that fooled no one. Autumn read it once, forwarded it to Priya with no comment, and went to shower. The fallout was not nothing. She had known it wouldn't be nothing. 2 institutional investors reduced their positions over the following week, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but visibly, and the market responded with a 2-point drop in share price over 3 days that the financial press treated as a verdict and which Autumn treated as a fluctuation, because she had been through worse and she understood the difference between a correction and a collapse. One board member, Harmon, resigned by email the following Monday with a letter that was 3 paragraphs of carefully phrased disappointment that Priya summarized as "he's annoyed and he's leaving and neither of us will miss him." There were 2 weeks of articles. Some were favorable, some were not, and several were the kind that used concern as a vehicle for condescension. The ones that discussed her wheelchair in the context of her emotional speech, drawing a line between the two that she found both predictable and exhausting. She read them and did not respond to them publicly, because responding was what they wanted, and what they wanted was evidence that she could be rattled. She could not be rattled. This was one of the few things she knew about herself with complete certainty. What she did do was work. The product launch happened on a Tuesday in early December, and it was, by any useful measure, excellent. Live demonstration, no critical technical failures, press coverage that emphasized the technology itself rather than the company's internal drama, and a response from their existing user base that outpaced Q4 projections by 8 points. The team had been building toward it for 8 months, and they delivered it cleanly, and Autumn stood at the front of their post-launch debrief and told them so without inflation. "You built this," she said. "Not me. You. The numbers prove it." Marcus, in the back of the room, made a note in his tablet that she suspected was not work-related. The Hendricks partnership finalized on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the gala. She signed the agreement in her office with Elliot Marsh as witness, and when the paperwork was done and Elliot had left with his copy, she sat alone at her desk for a moment with the executed contract in her hands and thought about the 7 months it had taken to get here. The negotiations, the revisions, the Singapore close that had made it possible, the countless hours of work that had nothing to do with parks or maintenance workers or the specific way a person could make a thermos of coffee feel like an act of genuine care. She had built this, all of it, even now. She put the contract in the file and called Marcus in for the afternoon's next item. Saturday came the way it had been coming for 3 weeks, anticipated with the low, persistent hum of something she kept trying not to make a bigger deal than it was, and kept failing. She had told him, bad lighting, good food, nowhere important to be. He had picked a restaurant in the West Village that she had walked past once, years ago, and never entered because she hadn't been in the habit of entering places without a reason. It was the kind of restaurant that had been there for decades, small and determinedly unchanged, with tables close enough together that you heard your neighbors' conversations unless you were focused enough on your own. She checked the accessibility before she went. She had learned to do this without anxiety, as a practical matter, the way you check the weather before choosing a coat. The entrance had a small step. The owner, Nathan said, had mentioned he kept a portable ramp behind the counter for exactly this purpose, which he knew because he had called ahead, which she found out only when she arrived, and saw the ramp already in place before she'd had to ask. She sat with that for a moment before going in. Inside, he was already there. Of course he was. He was the kind of person who arrived early, who factored in contingency time, who was where he said he would be when he said he would be. She had spent 4 years surrounded by people who arrived with 15-second apologies and called it fine. The reliability of him was something she was still learning to receive without cataloging it as data. He stood when she came in, which she didn't need him to do and which she had not expected, and which landed somewhere in her chest with a warmth she did not try to manage. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. They looked at each other across the small restaurant with the slightly stunned quality of two people who had been approaching a thing sideways for months and were now facing it directly. It was not smooth. She had not expected smooth. She had stopped expecting smooth as a general strategy and found it was working better. "You look—" He started and stopped. "Don't overthink the sentence," she said. "You look really good," he said, which was plainly meant and plainly delivered. "Thank you," she said. "So do you." And she meant it the same way. They sat across from each other at a table near the back, and the restaurant was exactly what he had promised. Dim light, small menu, the particular noise of a room full of people who had come to eat and talk and not to be seen. Nobody looked at her wheelchair. Nobody looked at them at all, really, because there was nothing particularly notable about two people at a table in a dim restaurant in the West Village on a Saturday night. And she had forgotten, genuinely forgotten, what it felt like to simply be present in a room without being architecture. They ordered. They talked. This was the part that surprised her. How easy it was. How entirely unlike every professional and social interaction she had been performing for 4 years. She had expected some awkwardness, some stiffness, the getting-to-know-you conversation that felt like filling out a form. Instead, they talked the way they had talked in the conference room that first afternoon, and in the park, and in the corridor on 22, with the ease of people who had already established something and were now simply giving it room. He told her about Claire. She had known the outline. She'd heard the word wife. She'd felt the shape of it in how he talked about Lily, in the particular quality of his competence with grief. But he told her the specifics now. They had met in their mid-20s, married young. Lily was 2 when the diagnosis came, and Claire had died 3 months before Lily turned 3. He said it without the performance of grief, without the careful packaging of a story told to prevent the listener from feeling too much. He said it like a fact he had learned to carry, heavy in a way that didn't go away, but familiar enough in its weight that he no longer had to put everything else down to hold it. "She would have liked you," he said. Autumn looked at him. "Why?" "Because you're interested in things, and you don't pretend to be interested when you're not." He considered this. She had no patience for pretending. "She sounds like someone I would have found exhausting and then trusted completely," Autumn said. He smiled. "That's accurate." She told him about the accident in return, the way she had told very few people, which was directly and without softening. The road, the truck, the ceiling of the hospital room, her mother's face. The 41 days, the firing of the 2 board members, which had felt, she admitted now, less like strength and more like terror wearing the clothing of strength. "You couldn't let anyone think it mattered," he said. "I couldn't let anyone think it had broken anything." "But it did. Something." She held that. "Yes," she said. "But the thing it broke needed to break. I just didn't understand that for a long time." "What did it break?" She was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them. Voices, the clink of glasses, someone at a nearby table laughing at something. The idea that control was safety, she said. I built everything on that idea after the accident, that if I controlled enough variables, nothing else could happen to me. That if I needed nothing, nothing could be taken. But you still needed things. Yes. I just made them very small. She looked at him. You made them larger again, without asking me if that was okay. Would you have said it was okay? No, she said. I would have said it was unnecessary. Yeah, he said. I figured. They ate. The food was good, simple and serious, the kind of cooking that didn't dress itself up. She had a glass of wine and he had one too, and the conversation moved the way conversations moved when two people were past the stage of being careful about what they revealed. He told her about this building, about the years before Orion Tower, about a job he'd had in his early 20s in a commercial complex in the Bronx where he'd accidentally diagnosed a structural issue in a load-bearing wall that the building's architect had missed, and how that was the moment he understood he had a particular kind of attention that not everyone had. The ability to read what wasn't being said, the symptom beneath the symptom. That's how you heard me in the elevator, she said. You weren't just managing the technical problem. No, he said. I was listening for what the technical problem was covering. She looked at him across the table. In the low light, with the noise of the room around them, he looked like what he was. A person who had not had an easy life and had not been made bitter by it, which she had come to understand was not a small thing. Bitterness was easy. It was available to everyone. Choosing not to carry it required something she didn't have a clean word for. Not optimism, which was too passive, not resilience, which was too clinical. Something more like refusal. The same quality she had, expressed differently. Nathan, she said. Yeah. I'm not... She paused. I need you to know that I am not good at this. At whatever this is. She gestured at the space between them. I'm very competent in about 15 specific domains, and this is not one of them. I'm going to be difficult sometimes. I'm going to revert. There are going to be weeks where everything I've learned to let down goes back up, because some crisis requires it, and I won't have the bandwidth to be... She searched for the word. Soft. I know, he said. I'm not... Autumn. His voice was patient but direct. I raised a 6-year-old by myself for 3 years. I know what it looks like when someone is doing their best with what they have. I'm not expecting perfect. She looked at him. What are you expecting? Honest, he said simply. That's all. She sat with that. Honest was something she could do. Honest was, in fact, the thing she had always been best at when she wasn't being afraid. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They split a dessert that was too sweet and very good and completely unphotogenic, and they sat in the restaurant for 2 hours after they'd finished eating, because neither of them suggested leaving, and the staff had enough sense or experience not to pressure them. And when they finally did leave, and the night was cold and clear outside, and the city was doing its Saturday night version of itself, loud and lit and full of its own importance, they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the particular suspension of a night that isn't quite over. He walked her to the car she'd arranged. At the door, they stood in the cold, and he looked at her with the same expression he'd had at the gala. The recognition, the steadiness. That was a good dinner, he said. Yes, she said. It was. He kissed her. It was brief and not dramatic and entirely intentional. The kind of kiss that was an argument against all the reasons something shouldn't happen, made simply and without needing to be large. She felt it the way she felt honest things, directly. Without buffer. Saturday, she said when it was done. Saturday, he agreed. She got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk in his coat in the cold until the car moved, and she did not let herself look back because looking back was something she was trying to do less of, as a general principle. She looked back anyway. He was still standing there. December settled over the city the way it always did, heavy and lit, and demanding in the way that cities demanded things from their people, extracting energy and attention and replacing it with noise and light, and the particular illusion that everything was moving towards something. Nathan walked Lily to school in the mornings, and the cold turned sharp, and Lily started wearing her coat with the rabbit ears on the hood that she was technically getting too old for and wore anyway, with the defiance of a child who had decided what she liked and was not interested in outside opinions. He told Lily about the date the way he handled most things with her. Straightforwardly, without performance, the Monday after. "It went well," he said. They were eating breakfast, cereal, and toast, the particular chaos of a Monday morning in a one-bedroom apartment. Lily looked at him. "Did you kiss her?" Lily. "Dad, did you?" He looked at his cereal. "Yes." She made a face that was the 6.5-year-old version of profound satisfaction. "I knew it," she said. "You didn't know anything." "I moved the ficus and you got the date," she said. "I basically made this happen." He stared at his daughter. "That is not what—" "You're welcome," she said, and went back to her cereal with the serene authority of someone who had made peace with being right. What? The weeks that followed were not a montage. That was the thing about real life that stories sometimes failed at. The transformation was not cinematic, not a sequence of golden-lit moments assembled to prove a point. It was Tuesday mornings, and logistics, and the particular friction of two people with full lives finding the space to be in each other's. There were things that were hard. Autumn's schedule was not built for flexibility, and there were weeks where the only time they saw each other was a brief visit to 42 that lasted 12 minutes and felt like stealing. There were evenings where she texted instead of called because she was in back-to-back meetings until 9 and didn't have the energy for the voice version of herself. There were moments where she could feel herself reverting, the walls going back up, the precision going cold, the part of her that had survived 4 years on controlled distance reaching for the familiar shape of it. He did not panic when this happened. That was the thing she kept noticing. She would go quiet for 2 days and then come back and he would be where she'd left him, not wounded, not performing patience, just genuinely untroubled by the rhythm of her. It infuriated her slightly, which she recognized as a sign that it was what she needed. She told him this once, directly. "You're not scared of the difficult version of me." "Should I be?" "Most people are." "Most people need you to be manageable," he said. "I don't need that." "Why not?" He thought about it. "Because you're the same person either way. The difficult version is just the version that's under pressure. It's still you." A pause. "I know what buildings look like under load. The structure doesn't change, it just shows you where it's actually strong." She sat with that for a long time. Lily's role in all of this was impossible to overstate and also impossible to fully describe because it was not dramatic. It was a series of small, ordinary admissions. It was Lily asking Autumn, on their second Saturday in the park after the gala, whether she knew how to play chess, and Autumn saying she did, and Lily saying she wanted to learn, and Nathan saying he'd get aboard, and the three of them spending an afternoon in Autumn's apartment, the first time she had let anyone into that space in over 2 years, at the coffee table with a chess set, and an instruction booklet that Lily read aloud in the wrong order, while Nathan made tea in a kitchen he didn't know, and Autumn sat on the floor, because the floor was where Lily needed to be, and the floor was where the chessboard was. She thought, sitting on the floor of her own apartment, watching a 6-year-old argue with an instruction booklet. I forgot rooms could feel like this. It was Lily falling asleep on the couch during a movie one Sunday evening in January, genuinely passed out with her head on Autumn's arm, and the particular stillness of that, the weight of a sleeping child, the trust implicit in it, the way Autumn sat completely still for 40 minutes rather than move and wake her, not out of strategy but because she didn't want to. It was Nathan, watching this from across the room, saying nothing, and the look on his face that she chose not to examine too directly, because examining it made her throat close in a way she didn't have a clean category for yet. "She likes you," he said quietly when Lily was finally moved to the bed. "She likes most people who listen to her," Autumn said. "No," he said. "She doesn't, actually. She likes people who mean what they say." A pause. "You always mean what you say." Autumn looked at him across the room. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in years," she said, which is probably concerning. "Yeah," he said. "We'll work on it." The board situation resolved itself over the course of January and February. the way these things resolved when the financial results were unambiguous. Q4 earnings came in strong. The product launch had performed. The Hendricks partnership had generated 2 additional referral conversations that were moving toward commitment, and the Singapore infrastructure was operational ahead of schedule. The share price recovered its December dip and then exceeded the pre-gala level by mid-February. Diane Cho attended board meetings. She was professional and entirely without warmth toward Autumn, and this was fine. Autumn did not require warmth from Diane Cho. She required the board to function, which it did. The 2 investors who had reduced positions maintained their reduced positions and were replaced over time by others drawn in by the company's momentum. The financial press moved on to the next story. Priya said, in March, "The storm passed." "The storm always passes," Autumn said. "The question is what's standing after." "You are," Priya said. "And your numbers." "And Hendricks." "And Hendricks." Priya was quiet for a moment. "And Nathan, I gather." Autumn looked at her. "Yes," she said. "And Nathan." Priya had the expression of someone who had more to say and had chosen, as a gift, not to say it. "Okay," she said. "Good." Spring came the way spring came in New York, reluctantly and then all at once, the temperature rising in a week and the parks filling back up and the city generating its particular spring energy, which was different from every other season's energy in the way it pushed outward rather than in. The Saturday Park ritual had become exactly that. A ritual, the kind built from repetition and small traditions. Lily's bird notebook was on its 2nd volume. Autumn had learned, over winter, to identify 7 more species than she'd known before, which was not knowledge she had ever expected to acquire and which she found she genuinely enjoyed. Nathan brought the thermos. This had not been discussed or formalized. It was just how it was. On a Saturday in April, they were in the park at the 72nd entrance, and Lily was 20 feet away explaining something to a pigeon with the intensity of someone who believed communication was possible if you were persistent enough. And Nathan was sitting on the bench with his coffee, and Autumn was beside him in the spring light. "I want to say something," she said. He looked at her. "I've been thinking about it for a few weeks, and I don't have a clean way to say it, so I'm just going to say it approximately." "Okay," he said. Before all of this, she gestured slightly, meaning the park, meaning him, meaning the whole shape of what the last 6 months had been. "I had decided, very firmly, that I didn't need anything I didn't already have. And that was not because I was okay. It was because I was afraid that needing things made them possible to lose." She paused. "And you made that harder, consistently, without being asked to. You just kept being the same person, every time." He waited. "I'm not the same person I was in October," she said. "I know that. You probably know that." A breath. "I'm better. I don't say that easily. I've spent 4 years telling people I was fine, and most of the time it was the professional version of fine, which means functional, but not actually all right." She looked at the park, the pigeons, her 6-year-old orator in the middle distance. "I'm actually all right now. Some of the time. More of the time than before." She turned to look at him directly. "I want you to know that's because of you, not entirely, but significantly." He was quiet for a moment. There was a thing in his face that was not the filing expression and not the recognition expression and not the steadiness he usually wore. Something else. Something that had been there for a while and was now simply visible because she was looking at it without flinching. "I want to say something back," he said. "Okay. After Claire died, I got very good at making things small," he said. "I was good at it before, a little, but after, I reduced everything to what was necessary. The job, Lily, the apartment. Because the big things were where the losses were, and I couldn't afford another loss like that." He looked at his hands. "You're the first person I've let back into the big version. I didn't plan it. It happened the way this building happened. Because I kept coming back to it, and it kept not being what I expected. And eventually I understood it was actually the right structure." She looked at him for a moment. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, and it was an architectural metaphor." "I work with buildings," he said. "I know." She put her hand over his on the bench between them. Not a grand gesture, just a hand covering another hand in the April light. It was perfect, she said. He turned his hand over under hers. Yeah, he said. Okay. Lily, 20 feet away, looked over and saw this and made no sound but raised both fists in a brief private celebration that she thought was invisible and which both of them saw and which neither of them mentioned because some things didn't need to be mentioned. There was never going to be a version of this that was simple. Autumn knew that, and she was no longer frightened of it. There were hard weeks. There were weeks where Autumn was inaccessible in the particular way that people who ran things were inaccessible. Not absent emotionally, but unavailable logistically, pulled into crises that ate hours and days, and left her depleted in a way that made softness difficult. Nathan learned the difference between those weeks and the other kind, learned, without being taught, when to be quiet, and when to push through the quiet, and when to just show up with coffee, and not require anything from her. She learned his things too. The way he went inward when he was worried about Lily, slightly quieter, more contained, the maintenance worker's habit of addressing problems internally before surfacing them. The way he still missed Claire in the particular way that didn't diminish with time, that just became part of the architecture of who he was, present in certain moments like a load-bearing thing you didn't see but could feel in the structure. She had learned not to tiptoe around it and not to make more of it than it was, to acknowledge it when it was there and let it be what it was, which was simply love that didn't end when the person did. She had learned that from him, actually, from watching how he carried it. Lily turned 7 in May. Autumn was there for the birthday dinner, which was at Nathan's apartment, small and loud and not remotely like the catered events she spent half her professional life attending. Lily had requested chicken tacos and a specific grocery store cake with blue frosting, and she got both. And she sat between Autumn and her father at the small kitchen table and told a very long story about a bird she had identified at school that no one believed her about. And Autumn believed her and looked it up on her phone and confirmed it. And Lily looked at her with the expression she had been looking at her with since the lobby, since the ficus, since the elevator. That expression of someone who has decided firmly that you are worth keeping. After dinner, Nathan was doing dishes and Lily was in her room supposedly getting ready for bed and actually reading with a flashlight in the way she thought was invisible. And Autumn sat at the kitchen table with the remnants of the blue frosting cake and thought about something. She thought about the woman who had arrived in this building in October, the one who moved fast and spoke precisely and had assembled her life into the smallest possible shape, who had decided that needing nothing was the same as being safe. That woman had been competent and formidable and genuinely capable of the things she did, and she had also been, in the most quiet and private sense, running. She was not running anymore. That was the difference. Not that she had become someone else. She was still the woman who arrived first, who pushed the chair forward, who did not soften the numbers when the numbers were bad. All of that was true and would remain true. But underneath it, the running had stopped. And the stillness underneath, the kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness, but was instead the presence of something real and chosen. That was new. She had not expected it to look like this. A kitchen table in a one-bedroom apartment with chicken taco remnants and blue frosting, and a 6-year-old reading by flashlight 20 feet away. She had not expected, when she set her alarm for 6 and settled into the rigid shape of the life she had made, that the thing which would unmake her carefully constructed solitude would be a maintenance worker who called elevators by their technical specifications and made his own coffee because the cart wasn't worth it. But she had learned something over the last 6 months that she suspected she would spend the rest of her life testing against experience. Strength was not the same thing as invulnerability. She had confused them for a long time. She had thought that needing nothing was proof of strength, that the absence of dependency was the same as capability, that letting people in was a liability rather than a resource. She had managed an empire on this logic, and it had worked, professionally, and it had cost her, personally, in ways she was only now fully tallying. Real strength, the kind that held under actual load, the kind that Nathan had been demonstrating to her since the first morning without naming it, was not about needing nothing. It was about knowing what you needed and choosing it anyway, even when the choosing was risky, even when the market responded poorly, even when the board questioned your judgment and the press ran the photo and the world looked at your life and offered its loud, unsolicited opinions. She had built a company. That was real. She had built it from a hospital room with a ceiling she had stared at while her mother cried, and she had kept building it through 41 days of recovery and 4 years of the particular loneliness of refusing to be anything other than impenetrable. The company was real, and she was proud of it, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But this was also real. The kitchen table, the blue frosting, the man doing dishes with the same attention he gave to buildings he loved, which was the same attention he gave to her, which was the same attention he would give to this life they were building out of ordinary materials, weekend parks and thermoses of coffee, and a child who wrote letters about plants, and a woman who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, that the walls she had built to survive were not the same as the home she wanted to live in. Nathan came out of the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He looked at her at the table with the remaining cake and the expression on her face that she wasn't managing. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And it was, in the full meaning of the word, not the professional version, not the functional version, but the actual one. "I'm okay." He sat down across from her. The apartment was quiet in the way it got quiet when Lily was in bed. Small and specific, and full of the warmth of a space where someone had made a life out of what was available. "She's reading with the flashlight," Autumn said. "I know," he said. "You're not going to address it?" "I'll go address it in 10 minutes, he said. "She gets 1 chapter. Autumn looked at him across the table. The kitchen light was on, yellow and ordinary, and outside the city was doing what it always did, and inside was this: a man with a dish towel and a woman in a wheelchair, and a kid with a flashlight and the particular mess of a birthday dinner, and none of it was what she had planned for herself, and all of it was exactly what she had needed, and she was done pretending those were not the same thing. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you." She said it simply, because simple was what it deserved. "For staying." He looked at her across the table. He didn't perform the response, didn't say of course or always or any of the things people said when they were filling space. He just looked at her with the steadiness that she had come to understand was not detachment, but was, in fact, its opposite. The kind of stillness that only happened when someone had decided that wherever they were was exactly where they meant to be. "Thank you for letting me," he said. Outside, a siren went somewhere in the city. A door closed on another floor. The building breathed the way it breathed at night, systems cycling, load distributing, the deep, quiet competence of a structure doing what it was built to do. Autumn Sinclair had run a billion-dollar company from a wheelchair and taught herself not to need anything, and it had kept her upright for 4 years, and it had not been enough. And that was all right. The things we build to survive us are not always the things we build to live in. She had learned the difference. She was still learning it, and sitting at a small kitchen table in a 1-bedroom apartment with the remains of a blue frosting cake and the sound of a child turning a page somewhere down the hall, that was, for the first time in a long time, enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.